Well, now, let's return to that damning report by MPs calling for a new tax to be levied on social networks to fund digital literacy classes in schools to tackle fake news. But do social media sites need policing? Joining us from central London to discuss that. Well, in a moment, we'll bring in Michael Walker from Novara Media. But first, we have the lawyer, Luke Gittos. Luke, good to see you again. Let's just start at the very top. I mean, is this a situation that you think needs to be dealt with? I mean, the conclusions of the CMS Select Committee are pretty damning. They say democracy is being threatened by this.
I think these panics arise when members of our political establishment don't understand what the public are voting for or why they're behaving in the way that they are. I think this is really a panic about democracy. And I think ever since the Brexit vote, since the vote for Trump, that people have been scrabbling around to try and explain these things, while completely failing to actually do any investigation about how people actually think. I mean, social media today is blamed and celebrated for all sorts of things it really has nothing to do with. Brexit had nothing to do with social media. I don't think Trump had anything to do with social media. The level of conspiracy
on what basis did social media have nothing to do with Donald Trump nor the EU referendum result? I mean, a lot of the debate took place on social media.
Well, you can say that, but a lot of people's lives are lived off social media. And a lot of the problems that led to the election of Donald Trump and a lot of the sentiment that gave rise to the Brexit vote, even though they're two completely different things in my view, both arose from real-life concerns, real-life worries that live in people's real lives. And I think that when you say that, the alt-right loved the idea that they memed Donald Trump into the White House, I think they're completely overestimating their own influence and power. People were genuinely disenfranchised in America from the political establishment, and people in Britain overwhelmingly voted to leave the EU, not because they saw a Facebook advert, but because they genuinely formed the view that it was the right thing to do. And when MPs leak reports like this, what they're really saying is that they don't understand the way that the public think. They have to blame it on some kind of malevolence, some kind of conspiracy that's happening in the background, when really all that this shows is they've completely lost touch with the views and opinions of their voting public. I think that nothing has been more readily overestimated than the influence of social media on contemporary politics.
Well, let's bring in Novara Media's Michael Walker. I mean, what do you make of that contention, Michael, that actually, far from being awash with fake news, we're still possessed of our critical faculties? We can recognise stuff which is false, pretty easily. And actually, in terms of the effect that news transmitted through social media has on the dynamic of referenda or elections, it's pretty minimal.
I think Luke definitely has a point that many people in the political establishment have tried to look to social media to blame and to explain election results that they don't understand. And I think it would be a mistake to see Brexit or Trump as just the result of social media and something that we could solve by regulating Facebook. People were voting because they had been disenfranchised. They wanted change, though they were rational voters. I think at the same time, it's perfectly reasonable for Parliament to be talking about how to regulate the big media monopolies. These are huge organisations that have massive control over the public sphere, and it's right that they are made more democratically accountable. In terms of this actual report, much of it is quite anodyne and makes sense. I think it makes sense that we say if a campaign wants to advertise to individuals on Facebook, all those adverts should be publicly available, so any claims made in them can be challenged. But I think it is very important that any regulation happens for the right reason and also shouldn't just be looked at negatively. We shouldn't just be saying, how do we stop fake news? We should look at the opportunity that comes with social media and how government policy can help the internet to flourish as a public sphere of debate.
Michael, as you say, it's fair enough for these politicians on the Select Committee to be talking about all of this, but you must be slightly concerned at the prospect of, politicians of all people having a hand in deciding what is and what isn't, for want of a better phrase, fake news.
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I've seen in the report, they don't seem to have particularly strong or determinate ideas about how they're actually going to stop fake news. They say harmful news will be the media corporations will be liable, or the social networks will be liable for harmful news which is put out on their platforms. I think that at the moment is very ambiguous. The proof will be in the pudding. But I think we can be more imaginative about how we would regulate these tech companies than thinking it will just be the government that controls them. I think we could easily think of a democratically controlled arm's-length organisation, a bit like the BBC, but hopefully a bit more democratic, which could be having an impact in running platforms like Facebook and Twitter.
Look, I mean, given your job, you'll be as aware as anyone else of the fact that, you know, sites like Facebook, Twitter have been resisting the push to be described as publishers for a number of legal reasons. But do you think that organisations like the two that I've just mentioned have taken enough responsibility over the content that they disseminate?
Yeah, I think the bigger threat is the kind of language that's used in this report. You know, the idea that there is such a thing as harmful news. That's incredibly draconian language. What they're suggesting is that there is a body who will decide what we, as the public, can and cannot see, and what is right for us to see. The whole point of a free press is that it's free to publish what is deemed in the public interest. And the idea that an external body needs to regulate that or decide for us what is harmful or not harmful news, I think is very, very frightening. I don't think this is really...
Isn't it the case that something either is or is not factually accurate?
Well, that's true, but we know very clearly from, you know, the other thing we should say is fake news is not a new issue. The media has always misreported, misrepresented, and the news has always had a political bent to it, you know. This is not a new phenomenon. The question we should ask is why this is coming about now. Why are MPs particularly starting to panic about the possibility of fake news now? And the reason is, as has been suggested, that democracy is throwing up results that they don't understand and want to blame it on something. So this is not a new phenomenon. And I really think that the push to regulate, to control and influence the press, even in the most subtle way, is extremely dangerous. The idea that we would introduce the idea of harmful news, the idea that we should, a body should decide what we can and cannot see, it underestimates our own critical faculties. It underestimates our ability to judge and be reasonable about the news that we receive. And I think that's a very, very dangerous trend with very, very serious implications for democracy.
I think I saw Michael nodding along with at least some of that. But I just want to put a final point to you, Michael. The idea that you know, fake news is the biggest issue isn't the greatest concern for the democratic process, that targeted political campaigning down to you know, focusing adverts on the individuals. We really don't know enough about that, do we?
Well, I think targeted adverts happen on all sides of the political debate. Remain did it, Leave did it, Labour does it. The Tories do it. I think it is important that those are publicly visible, though. I think the idea that people are seeing completely different adverts and we're not aware of what other people are seeing is quite dangerous. I think generally I'd agree with a lot of what Luke has said, and I think we share the same concerns that any clampdown on political campaigning or news could be led by an establishment desire to put the populist genie back in the bottle. I think that would be very unhelpful for democracy. I think we also need to look at how the internet as it currently works, though, is not an ideal democratic commons. So the owner of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, currently has a hell of a lot of quite unaccountable power. He can change the algorithms. He can change what users see. So I do think this is the time to be talking about democratic control of these platforms. And that shouldn't be purely about shutting down things that the government think are bad.
Michael, look, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but thank you both for your time today. Appreciate it.